Hello, I'm Ngutu Daudi.
And I'm Becky Katagaya.
And welcome to
Fasi Fasi,
the show where we make way for women on this leadership path.
Now on the show today, we are dealing with violence towards women in Uganda's politics.
And talk about how we can clean that up.
Joining us to further this debate, we have human rights advocate Babidi Hadija.
And we have champion for women's rights, Nicholas Ogwal.
Lawyer Laura Kanushu.
And media specialist Rosebel Kogumire.
Without any further ado, let's make way
and make some noise. Fear of election-related violence hangs over Uganda, especially during the general election.
The most pronounced election-related violence was in 2001 when Major Kakoza Mutale and his gang moved around the country, beating up supporters of Chiza Besigye.
Mutale was never apprehended and many voters were intimidated.
This scene was repeated numerous times in 2016.
The violence experienced in the streets by citizens is also reflected in the corridors of power.
Violence is not always physical. It manifests itself in different forms for the purpose of controlling others. Does violence in its many forms discourage more women from taking on leadership roles?
A big thank you for you joining us once again here on Fasi Fasi, the show where we make way for women on this leadership path.
And for you at home, if you want to join us, the hashtag is FasFas across all our social media platforms.
And of course, a big thank you to our guests who are ever so kind to give us their time and come here to share their opinions. But let's get into it. Politics in this country involves, well, a lot of being bundled on the back of trucks and a lot of action, with authorities or things like that. It seems like politics has a violent culture. Is it safe to make that assumption? I'll start with, because you're a media person, you probably reported and witnessed a lot of this. Is it possible to make that assumption that politics has a very violent culture in this country?
I think we have to go back to our culture and how women participation in public spaces and look at where we've come from and where we are now, and what makes it capable for women to come into the workplace or the public space to talk about what they feel, and also to feel that they can represent somebody. So we don't just look at the violence in what is visible, but also the institutional systematic violence.
There is institutional violence. Can you just please shed some light on that? Because I mean, we might be talking about the violence that we see
physical,
when police is banding people up and things like that. But there's another form of violence. Can you just please shed some light on what that is?
Yeah, so beyond the scenes of seeing women's breasts pulled by police officers and thrown in trenches, I think we have to think of systematic violence where you find the system does not make it well for women because the majority of the players in the system are men. And what makes it, how can that one woman, if you begin with the LC where they say on the committee has to be one woman, and imagine you're just that one woman, does your voice count? How are we raised to respect women's voices when it comes to decision making? So I'm talking about that kind of systematic violence, that discrimination against women that exists in our society. Yeah.
Miss Babidi Hadija, I wanted to ask, she has talked about the physical aggression, which is physical violence, and institutional violence. You as a human rights advocate, do you ever receive cases of institutional violence from women in the political arena?
Yes. Like my colleague has said, we have a history as Uganda in regards to women participation in politics. I'm one of the women who are really participating in politics, and I'm leading a women's league in Justice Forum. And we have an issue, especially in terms of violence, when it comes to the way the space is created for women, especially in the mainstream of these parties or the political institution. So when it comes to the way women participate in politics, most of the time the decision is made by the men who are the topmost leaders in most of those institutions. So like when it comes to the real participation, like for example, if it is election or we are in a rally, you find that even the institution of police, when they come to Normally we write letters to ensure that we get our women be part and participate in this politics. But sometimes we find that most of the people who come to violate their rights, especially when it comes to physical, the way they tear gas and blah blah, it is always the men. And the women who are part of the institution of police who come, it's like the way they treat these women, it's like they are not part of the women's side. So in the long run, women fail to get where to run in case they want their vote to be counted.
Because they're at war with both men and women.
Nixon, does the landscape, as it is, especially with the physical attributes, because people say, you know what, you have to have a certain kind of tough bone to go into Ugandan politics because of the nature of the politics that it is. Does it stop women from actually getting involved, or is it just an excuse that, you know, women use because after all it's happening to everyone?
Thank you for that question. You know, this is a very male-dominated country in everything, including politics. So the design of that space, it favors men.
David's question earlier had an element of, could it be an excuse? Could the women be taking a back seat? Could it be that they have decided to play the more docile role? Sort of, you know, it's a patriarchal society, it is turbulent, I'll sit it out. Do you think we are not fighting hard enough to get into those spaces? We are not making our voices hard enough because we're thinking, it's a man's game. Let me do the woman's role and that's that. Could it be?
I think no, because if you look at the history of this country, in the past, we didn't have women in leadership, we didn't have so many women in politics. Now that we see the number increasing, that means that women have come out of wherever they have been to come and speak out or to come and join the political space. Now, because like Nixon said, it's a patriarchal system. And in my view, violence is not just when the police bundles you on the track and takes you. Violence is first the attitude that people have towards women. For example, in the patriarchal system, we all know that in Africa, women are supposed to stay home, look after children, cook food. So when you come out and say, I want to be a member of parliament, I want to be a president, there's a problem with this woman. She's a cantankerous woman. What's wrong with her? That's a problem. That's an attitudinal problem. So that's violence enough. That even when you tell your family that, you know, I want to go into politics, everybody is thinking, is she? Do you really want to go there? Yeah. So for me, that's the first form of violence. But also when you participate in politics as a woman, and if you will allow me to even, if I can take it deeper and say, for us even women with disabilities, it's even worse to say that, oh, I'm a woman with disability, but I want to be in leadership, or even to just be a woman. I mean, being a woman in this system of ours, in the society of ours, is bad, and also being a woman with a disability is worse, bad enough. Yeah. So you have to fight so many hurdles for you to come out and say, look here, I am a woman, maybe I have a disability or I don't have a disability, but I want to enter into this political space. First, you'll have the attitude problem. Then you'll have issues, especially when you're standing with a man for a particular position. It can be very hard for, how are you going to manage a man? But also we have to know that our politics have been commercialized. That's the truth. Whether you want to become LC1 or LC what or a member of parliament, whatever you want to become, you will have to put in some money. And we know that women are not on the same level financially as men. So that's also a form of violence, because if Nixon has more money than me and we're standing on the same position, definitely.
Isn't that the way the world is? There's always going to be someone with more money than you.
Yes, but perhaps...
Depends on what defines that someone. It could be by their class, their race, or their gender. Yeah. In this case, we are talking about the gender gap between men and women in terms of income inequality and how it affects the violence, financial deprivation of women, how it affects them with when it comes to entering public office. Yeah. It's very important. But also when we think of patriarchy, it's not something only men have. It's also women are taught to conduct themselves in a certain way. If I come to a talk show, I have to sit in. If I sit in a certain way, it will be the talk of the day. So these things are projected to women to make them fear that space, that the woman must fit themselves in a certain way, carry yourself in a certain way, let people like you in a certain way. Things we do not expect of men, first of all, outside the political office, but then it's more amplified when you're in a political office. It's like, oh, why would you do that? Like, a woman in politics, in a public space, is expected to narrow themselves to this image of what the public wants to see. Too much pressure on a woman, and that kind of discrimination really prevents women from entering that space.
And we're going to get back to this in just a bit. We have to take a quick break, but in the meantime, if you're at home, you can keep your conversation going online and making some noise in our social media platforms. The hashtag is Fasi Fasi.